everyone. Can you hear me? Okay. So first of all, thank you very much, Olivier and Elsa and everyone from Virtualité for inviting me here today. My talk is going to be quite different, perhaps, from most of the other talks you've heard, most specifically even the talk that just preceded mine, because I'm really going to be talking about how we may want to think about VR as we build the ecosystem of the immersive media landscape. And the kinds of things that I'm going to say should matter aren't necessarily the aesthetic considerations or the kind of ways in which we're building these experiences, but looking at perhaps the infrastructure that we're building and what role creators, entrepreneurs, and artists play in ensuring that the infrastructure of the immersive media space we build is as inclusive and includes public interest as much as possible. So first we need to talk about the context of where my talk is coming from, and I think it really stems from three spaces. The first space is really the kind of breadth of knowledge and research and findings and analysis that has emerged over the past 20 years around where our social, political, and economic sort of context lies today. And it involves everything from inequality studies by Piketty to actually having lived with technology for so long that we can now study its effects. So sort of findings by Sherry Turkle and how, you know, technologies are potentially fragmenting families, all the way to obviously highly contentious, perhaps 10 years ago, studies around climate change, but which today is just common knowledge. So all this stuff is really part and parcel of how we need to think about where to situate VR, is what's the social, political, economic context in which we live, and how are we going to situate the work that we do within that context. The second sort of, I think, important thing for all of us to note is how in 2017, sort of it's become mainstream knowledge that we're living in a platform monopoly type of environment. And that the technology promise of a democratized web and internet that would be decentralized and enable all sorts of flourishing public conversations to happen has been really in contention with a much more powerful force. And these are the platform monopolies of, you know, the big five or the big four, depending on where you're from. And then lastly, it's the fact that although we may understand these two contexts, technology is not going to stop, right? So there's a galloping stage and cycle of innovation that's exploding as we speak, where the true convergence that we all may have been talking about as content creators, again, 12 years ago, is really within these four technology spaces, if you will. So first and foremost, obviously, immersive media, because that's what we're talking about today. But AI and all the kind of quasi-AI things that are going on, whether that's big data or machine learning. The IoT space, so smart everything. I'm from Toronto, so I'm very worried about the new Alphabet Labs sort of RFP, request for proposal, that they won from Waterfront Toronto, making Toronto the site for the first ever sort of urban experimentation project by a massive monopoly like Google. And cybersecurity in the space of blockchain. So all of these things are kind of converging and galloping together to create what will be the next computing platform that we're all going to have to live with. And so we really need to kind of contextualize how we want to build this immersive media ecosystem in the context of these forces. So what should we do now? So today what I want to do is really talk about 12 things that I think we might want to keep in mind. These 12 things, as I said, aren't necessarily sort of I'm not saying that these 12 things should replace the kinds of artistic or aesthetic or sort of experience design concerns that we have as creators and entrepreneurs and artists, but it should actually be thought about in parallel with them, because we can no longer afford to kind of leave infrastructure concerns and industry sectoral concerns to other people's hands and not take part in it. Does everybody agree with that? Okay. First and foremost is we have to definitely think about the business model. So in terms of the business model, what we do know is that big data has driven a large portion of how wealth got generated in the internet. It's not like the internet and immersive media are separated. Immersive media could potentially just amplify all the fissures and cracks that we've seen in the internet-based business model, which is largely known as this zero moment of truth model, right? Where search, in effect, allows people to determine what it is that they want to buy, and then that drives how consumers end up buying things, coupled with these platforms knowing exactly what consumers do, their behaviors, et cetera, and how they've kind of aggregated all those data sets. They can then feed consumers these desires even prior to them knowing that they desire those things. So you've seen ads follow you throughout, from platform to platform or website to website. Well, this is just going to move over into the immersive media space if we don't watch out, right? So this is the presentation of Building 8 by the researcher that Facebook hired, Dr. Duggan, who I believe is no longer there. But this is their kind of announcement that they're going to be creating this brain interface that would enable their systems to be able to figure out exactly what people are thinking and then feed them the stuff that they want. So we have to be careful about where we land in terms of building the types of platforms, tools, and content experiences without really paying attention to the type of business model that we're actually promoting. So some of us might say, you know what, I don't care, but at least understand your intention in doing so. We can't do that sort of without intentionally determining where we stand in that continuum of where that business model should be. But as creators, I think, you know, we have to actually think about it. So the platform tool creators might say, I want to be that sub-zero moment of truth person who will determine people's desires before they even know it, and that's how my technology will work, and that's how I'm going to get paid. Fine enough. But as creators, we can't sort of not pay attention to how we're going to get paid, and without thinking about the types of platforms and tools we end up using and or distributing our content in. So I think it's important to be resolute about payment. Now, the good news is that the whole sort of payment category is starting to get a bit more open, especially for creators. So this is a Farhud Manjoo editorial from the New York Times in 2017, where he spoke about the rise of subscription-based services and how people meaning the ordinary citizen, are now starting to see the effects of being given content through these platform monopolies like Facebook, and understanding that if they actually want to kind of have more control over the type of content they consume, they might actually have to support those either news services, which is what Manjoo's talking about here, but certainly creators whose point of view is more aligned with theirs, and actually need to support them monetarily. So I think that's really a kind of a good news story. But as creators, you know, how many of you guys who are creating VR content right now, giving it away for free? How many of you are actually thinking about creating a direct relationship with your audiences so that they pay for the stuff that you're building? And, you know, really understanding that process. Another thing to think about is to be clear about this locus of control, meaning who is actually in control of the platform, the workflow, the production workflow system, so where things get distributed, and the relationship between sort of the control centers and users' understanding of who is actually in control. So how transparent are the terms and conditions that that are in place with the various platforms that we design on? So again, having a good understanding of the differences in the terms and conditions between an HTC Vive, an Oculus, an Open VR, OS VR, et cetera, is really important. And So I'm not necessarily prescribing, although maybe implicitly, that we should opt for, you know, more open standards and stuff. But I'm also saying that at least be aware of what it is that you're signing up for. I think, however, that there is a case to be said for really being open to open standards and user-owned platforms. So here's an example of one that's taking place in the web VR world called Decentraland. So it's an Ethereum-based virtual metaverse creation platform where users create land and sell it or buy it and sell services within it. And so it's completely decentralized, and all the digital assets within it are owned by various users. And then the transactions are more transparent, and they're all decrypted, obviously, using with the blockchain. So I think we're going to see more and more examples of this. What might be interesting, I couldn't find an example, are cooperative media efforts. So in this case, this is just pure user-owned, sort of more, I guess, more like a decentralized thing, which is not exactly the same as cooperative media, where all the users collectively own everything and then share in the profits of it. So that's something that I think could be an interesting model for people to be looking into. The next thing I think that, you know, we're starting to see the kind of some thinking around is really not forgetting that immersive media is also a networked media. So as creators, we really start to, and also entrepreneurs, we need to start to be really, really almost bullish about understanding that VR and immersive media is a networked medium. And so we have to be network aware. But at the same time, I think we can't kind of just assume that the networked aware kind of models or experiences out there are only social platforms, right? And so what are the types of experiences that we can be creating that can actually incite sort of participatory, spontaneous participation from users? And I think a lot of that type of thinking around participatory art and sort of viral-driven art can be seen or can be found in the kind of art and technology history that we've had over the past 20 years. So this is Raphael Lozano Hammer's piece from 2001 called Body Movies. Obviously, it's not VR, but this kind of large-scale projection-based installation is most definitely immersive. And how the immersive artists of you know, prior to this evolution of VR dealt with participation, I think would be very interesting for us to study and look at. However, just because it's networked, we have to also be kind of aware that although yes, this is a networked medium, there are lots of unintended consequences that we've seen now as a result of the networked characteristic of this medium, right? So network effects aren't necessarily all to the positive. They can actually engender all sorts of consequences that people haven't thought about. The fake news sort of debacle from last year is a perfect example of this. And now this is going to be a very difficult thing for platforms like Facebook to fix, because essentially their advertising model is so based around engagement, and that kind of drive towards engagement actually unintendedly resulted in the rise of fake news proliferation. So it's going to be a difficult thing, and we don't want that same type of set of consequences to impact immersive media, or at least even impact that next computing platform that we're building, which is a combination of immersive media, AI, IoT, etc. I'm just going to take a quick drink. But in the meantime, I'm happy to, I've got 5 minutes, so maybe I'll wait till the end. The second thing, the seventh thing, there's 12, so I'm getting there. The seventh thing that I think we should definitely look into is really driving towards values-based models, okay? Uber, a whole bunch of these new types of platforms are getting slammed left, right, and center for not actually having that kind of core sort of intentional, value-driven business culture. And I think what we're finding is we're actually moving towards these values-driven businesses as being better businesses and probably more profitable businesses. So sort of kind of building a business model today for immersive media on past business models of the web world of, let's say, 10 years ago, probably is not a very good idea, because the regulatory environment and the kinds of things that we're seeing is going to be changing, so that in 10 years' time, those kinds of business models might not be really good. We have to signal the right things. So this, how many of you guys know what this picture is? I'm really slamming Facebook today, but anyway, I don't think the French would mind. So this is the big kind of like totally inappropriate, and he didn't even realize this was happening, sort of demo of Facebook Social, where Mark Zuckerberg decided to go and take a tour of Puerto Rico right after the natural disaster occurred. And it really was this perfect example of what actually was signaled early on in the VR industry, I think, which is this drive towards this type of shallow understanding of what empathy is all about, right? And so part of what I think we have to worry about is signaling the wrong things as we're starting to birth this part of the VR evolution. And it's up to us as this kind of collective community of creators to be more critical, I think. And I don't think we are critical enough. So we really need to understand what it means to be diverse and integrated. And so Lynette Walworth is one of those people, I think, who understand that. She's a VR filmmaker. She just launched this particular project called Awavena in Sundance. Hussein's there to talk about how great it was. Unfortunately, I haven't seen it yet, but I have heard her talk about it and spoke with her directly about this particular piece. And what's interesting about the way Lynette kind of approaches the type of VR works that she's building is she's really trying to understand VR almost in the same way that Char Davies, one of the VR artists of the first wave of VR, understood it, which is it's not about the literalization, it's not about recreating reality or being so literal about what lived reality is all about, but it's really about how do we use these technologies to actually explore the hidden reality of what the human condition presents. And so whether that's a notion of consciousness or whether that's a notion of helping people to embody emotions that they have a difficult time embodying. These are the kinds of things that I think could be explored in VR. And Yuval Noah Harari really kind of underscores this stuff by saying we need to stay on top of algorithms and privilege an understanding of consciousness, because if we don't, then the algorithms are going to take over, essentially. So it's a kind of rallying call to say it's really important for us to, more than ever, understand what it is to be human, more than understand the kinds of tools that we're creating. The next thing is obviously being vigilant about privacy. I'm not going to belabor that issue because I think it's quite clear. The restoration of the public commons is really, really important. There are no public spaces on the web. There are no public spaces on the web. That's a problem. Like, where are the parks? Where are the sidewalks that you're not allowed to put ads on? Where are the highways where you can't put ads on because of danger? Where are all sorts of protected environments? As we move into a metaverse, how are we going to ensure that a public commons exists? And then last but not least, we really need to commit to an ethical framework, because without this ethical framework, we're going to hurl into that virtuous cycle of innovation model that I was talking about without even understanding where we're going. And if anyone can tell me what that picture is, Shout it. Does anybody know? Go. What is it? Yes, it's the stack and altered carbon. So read the books, watch the Netflix series, because that's really what this particular film or series is about, is we can hurl into that future, the altered carbon future, without even knowing it. Thank you very much.